Pennsylvania is one of those states where you can be doing everything right and still end up in handcuffs because of one invisible line you crossed. You can be 100% legal standing on your porch, and then the second you sit down in your car, the rules flip and the penalties jump fast. Because Pennsylvania gun law isn't hard in the paperwork way, it's hard in the gotcha way. It's the small stuff that catches normal people. Stay with me because in Chapter 2, I'm going to show you the single most common Pennsylvania carry mistake that turns a responsible gun owner into a criminal without them even realizing they broke the law. Chapter 1. Buying a gun in Pennsylvania. Now, buying a firearm in Pennsylvania feels straightforward. You go to a dealer, you run the background check, you walk out. But in Pennsylvania, it's not just NICS, N-I-C-S. The dealer runs PICS, P-I-C-S. Pennsylvania's system through the state police. And here's the part a lot of people still get wrong. If you buy or sell a handgun privately, you can't just hand it over like it's a flashlight. Pennsylvania generally requires private handgun transfers to go through an FFL or the sheriff's office, with the legal family exceptions. Regular rifles and shotguns are treated differently under current state law. Now that's the first landmine, but the bigger landmine hits right after you buy the gun. Because the moment you put it in your car, Pennsylvania stops being easy. And that's Chapter 2. Chapter 2, the vehicle trap. Now here's the trap in one line. In Pennsylvania, being in a vehicle changes everything. You can open carry on foot in much of Pennsylvania if you're legally allowed to possess a gun. But the moment you put a handgun in a vehicle, or a Pennsylvania-defined firearm like a short-barreled rifle or shotgun, Pennsylvania treats that differently. Now you're in Section 6106 territory. That means if you toss a handgun in a glove box, under the seat, in a bag, in a central console, whatever, and you don't have a valid LTCF, or you don't fit a very specific exception, you can get charged. And this is where people argue online and get burned in real life. But it wasn't concealed, it was in my car. Carrying a handgun or a defined firearm in a vehicle is its own problem under the carry without a license rule. Now here's the second vehicle landmine people forget. Pennsylvania also has a separate rule under the game code about loaded firearms in vehicles. It's broadly written and it's not just hunters in the woods. And there's an important nuance people miss. Under the game code rule, there's a carve out for someone with an LTCF carrying a loaded pistol or revolver. But without that, loaded in the vehicle can become its own charge. And now that you understand how fast Pennsylvania flips in a car, now let's talk about the other place Pennsylvania flips fast. Philadelphia. Chapter 3. Philadelphia, the city rules. For years, the simple street version was Pennsylvania is generally open carry friendly except Philadelphia. Philadelphia's special rule is in Pennsylvania Title 18, Section 6108, which bans carrying a firearm, rifle, or shotgun on public streets, public property in Philly unless you're licensed or covered by an exception. Now, two things to remember in 2026. The statute itself says there are exceptions. The law's text specifically notes exceptions, including people who qualify for certain Section 6106B carry exceptions. So the old Philly doesn't allow any transport exceptions. Oversimplification can get you in trouble either way, because the real issue is whether you fit the exact exception perfectly. Number 2, the Superior Court cracked the foundation in 2025. In Commonwealth v. Sumpter, filed June 23, 2025, the Pennsylvania Superior Court held Section 6108 was unconstitutional as applied to unlicensed open carry on public street or public property in Philadelphia on equal protection grounds and vacated that conviction. Then, in Commonwealth v. Holden, filed July 30th, 2025, the court followed Sumpter and reversed another Section 6108 conviction. Holden was a non-precedential memorandum. In layman's terms, Holden isn't a rule that automatically binds every future case. It's more like the court saying, we're following Sumpter here, but Sumpter is the big one people will cite. So heading into 2026, the reality is Philadelphia's special rule, quote unquote, is an active legal warfare, and what's enforceable can depend on whether it's open carry versus concealed, what facts you have, and what the higher courts do next. If you want the safe real-world advice, Philadelphia is still the place you don't freestyle. If you're going to carry there, do it clean. Know your license status, know your transport posture, and don't assume internet shortcuts protect you. And speaking of the city that can't just make its own gun laws, that brings us to the law that stops Pennsylvania from turning into a patchwork nightmare. Now, real quick, what's your take on Philly's rule getting cracked in court? Do you think cities should get to write their own gun laws, or should it stay state level? Comment state or city down below and tell me why. I'm reading every one of these. Chapter 4, State Preemption. Pennsylvania has strong state preemption, meaning counties and cities generally can't make their own gun ownership, possession, transfer, or transportation rules. And this isn't theoretical. Philadelphia tried to break that wall in court. In 2024, Pennsylvania's Supreme Court ruled unanimously against the lawsuit that sought to overturn the preemption framework, keeping the statewide standard in place. So statewide, the idea is you shouldn't need a different rule book every time you cross a municipal line. But just because the city can't rewrite the entire system doesn't mean you're safe during a police stop. Because the next trap is what people think they have to say. Chapter 5, Traffic Stops. Pennsylvania is not states where you're automatically required to blurt out, "Officer, I have a firearm." There isn't a blanket duty to inform the way people claim online. But here's the reality check that does matter. If you're carrying concealed or in a vehicle and you're licensed, Pennsylvania law says that upon lawful demand, you must produce your license to carry firearms for inspection. And here's the part that bites good people. If you don't produce it, the law says that can create a rebuttal presumption that you're not licensed. Translation: I have it at home can turn into a long, expensive problem. Same idea if you're not licensed and you're relying on an exception, going to the range, transporting unloaded in a secure wrapper, things like that. If you're claiming an exception under the carry without a license law, Pennsylvania says you must be able to produce satisfactory evidence you qualify for that exception when law enforcement lawfully demands it. So the practical takeaway is simple. Try not to escalate the stop. Don't badger the cop. If the officer lawfully asks, you provide what the law requires, your LTCF, and whatever documentation applies to your situation. Because traffic stops are one kind of stress. The other kind is when you actually feel threatened. And Pennsylvania self-defense law is another place people think they know the rule until they're betting their life on the wrong version. Chapter 6, Stand Your Ground and Castle Doctrine, what the law actually says. Pennsylvania's self-defense law starts with a basic principle. Force can be justified when you reasonably believe it's immediately necessary to protect yourself against unlawful force. But people get sloppy when they talk about deadly force. Pennsylvania's Stand Your Ground concept is not a blank check. Outside your home, the duty to retreat question can hinge on specific conditions like whether you're somewhere you have a right to be, whether you're engaged in criminal activity, and whether the attacker is using or displaying a deadly weapon. And in the home and certain other protected places, Pennsylvania's Castle Doctrine rules can shift the analysis hard, especially around unlawful entry. Here's why I'm being careful with wording. Self-defense is one of the fastest ways for "I'm right" to turn into "I'm charged" if you're relying on vibes instead of actual statute. I recommend finding a local class or seminar on the subject and really diving into it so you know exactly what it is. Now this leads us into the next chapter because Pennsylvania has one category where your intent doesn't matter, where "I don't know" doesn't save you. Chapter 7, the "I didn't think this applied to me" moments. Now most gun owners already know the big one. I'm not a prohibited person. Cool, you're not prohibited. In Pennsylvania, there's the First Protection from Abuse Orders, PFA. PFAs can include firearm or weapon relinquishment requirements, which specific rules on how you're supposed to relinquish and document it. This isn't a maybe later thing when it hits. The timeline can be tight and paperwork matters. And separately, certain qualifying protective orders can also trigger federal firearm restrictions while the order is in effect. Now, the second is misdemeanor domestic violence. A lot of people hear misdemeanor and think not a gun rights thing. But under federal law, a qualifying misdemeanor crime of domestic violence can bar firearm possession. And third, certain drug convictions or equivalent offenses. Pennsylvania's prohibited person rules aren't only violent felonies. The state statute and PSP guidance cover categories like certain drug offenses and equivalents, and out-of-state equivalents can matter too. Here's the takeaway. If any of that touches your life, PFA, DV history, or certain drug cases, don't freestyle. Verify your status before you carry again. Now let's get back to the big practical stuff that affects everyone in Pennsylvania. Chapter 8, State of Emergency Switch. Now this is a rule I really don't get. If someone can make an argument for it in the comments, I'd love to read it. Now this is Title 18 from Pennsylvania Consolidated Statutes, Section 6107. And what it does, during an emergency proclaimed by a state or municipal governmental executive, you generally can't carry a firearm on public streets or public property unless you're covered by an exception or you're actively defending life or property from immediate danger. Now, this has been a Pennsylvania law since 1995, and it was amended in 2008, including language that says an emergency isn't a free excuse for confiscation beyond what would already be lawful. Now, has it been used? Yeah. Pennsylvania has issued statewide emergency proclamation in recent years, like the opioid emergency in 2018 and the COVID-19 emergency in 2020. When those are active, Section 6107 is basically on. Now, did it make anyone safer? There's no clean official proof that Section 6107 itself reduced crime. What it definitely does is create a legal tripwire for people trying to stay within the law. And in my opinion, it made no sense to disarm people during the emergencies. But that's just me. Is anyone exempt from this law? Well, thankfully, if you have a LTCF, you're fine. People who fit into Section 6106B are exempt. Now, think certain on-duty law enforcement officers, military, federal officers, armored transport, hunting situations, and someone actively defending life or property from immediate danger. But now that you've seen this switch that can be used to turn rights on and off, you won't unsee it. So what does the future hold for Pennsylvania and its people? Chapter 9, The Future of Gun Rights in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's direction is basically a tug of war. One side pushes for expansions like permitless carry, the other pushes for restrictions like expanded background checks, ghost gun bans, and red flag style policies. Here's a real recent data point. On September 30th, 2025, the Pennsylvania House passed HB 1593 to expand background checks by removing the long gun private sale exemption, and it was sent to Senate Judiciary on October 3rd, 2025. That same day, the House narrowly defeated other measures, including HB 1859. That's the red flag style policy. And HB 1099. That's the extra ghost gun restrictions. Also, Philadelphia's special carry rule is still in legal motion after the 2025 Superior Court decisions, so what the courts do next matters for 2026 and beyond. Now, most people watching this, in fact, I'm sure all people watching this, aren't looking for trouble. They're just trying to live a normal life and stay legal doing it. Normal people don't want attention. They want to get home safely. So check out our concealed carry athletic shorts and sweatpants with hidden inner belts so you can concealed carry comfortably. We build Second Amendment clothing for everyday life, not just range day. It's all linked below, or go to relaxfittactical.com to see our full lineup. Drop a like, let us know what topic to hit next, and as usual, don't be lame, subscribe.